stranded on this deserted island in the middle of the ocean.
I'm gonna spend the next 7 days buried alive under 20,000 pounds of dirt.
Are we living in a clickbait universe?
They call it the Mr. Beastification of YouTube. He's changed how people watch the first 30 seconds of a video. He managed to condense what's happening in the next 15 minutes into the tightest 60 seconds.
Is that the way we're sort of intrigued, enticed, and solicited?
There's a question now about is everybody going to end up being a 50-year-old YouTuber? Right now, anybody can make a show. You don't need like a big camera. You don't need like you don't need to have these exorbitant production costs. If you ask Joe Rogan, I don't think he considers it work because he's done the legwork for 5, 8, 10 years where nobody was paying attention.
I'm going to move into a more delicate arena.
Go on.
And hit you with a couple of spicy questions, if I may. Found yourself in a little bit of a controversy.
Well, I guess maybe for context for folks who may not know.
Please.
Ooh, a good idea.
Welcome to Marketing Mavericks, a light-hearted chat with a wide variety of unique individuals. Just in the world of marketing, just to see what makes them tick and think. And again, you know, we're again presented with a beautiful personality and someone that I've known for a long, long time, Ezra Zaid. Before I get you to speak, I'm going to give your background to our listeners.
Let's give it a go.
Because it's fairly distinguished. Experienced radio producer, multifaceted entrepreneur, content strategist, and now in the diverse world of film. Is there anything you haven't done?
I've tried to do as many things as I can to remain relevant. I think that's probably the main sell. Everything's been developing so fast over the past 15 years. You're just trying to stay afloat as best as you can.
Well, listen, mate, you're, I think, well known to most audiences because you've had many sort of content series online and things like that.
Sure. Just
for our audiences, do you want to give a bit of background in terms of what you've been up to recently?
More recently, I was a content strategist for a SVOD platform for a tech company based out of Malaysia and Singapore. And so I was developing the content acquisition of their films and television shows and sort of acquiring it and making sure that it's available for users, for people who want to watch content online.
So you've gone into feature films?
Yeah, well, on the business side of things now more so. I used to be sort of developing content for brands. I used to produce radio shows, produce online shows, do documentaries. So now I'm on almost the other side, on the back end of things, of trying to figure out how to commercialize it and make money a little bit. And so that's been what I've been up to over the more recent times, yeah.
Oh, pretty cool. And so, I mean, just on that notion, is it predominantly local or international type of
that's the question, right? I mean, I think it's trying to develop local and regional content that can cross over and sell to those sort of the wider market. And, you know, you want to fish in as big as a pond as you can. And I think Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, this region is having a moment, at least in developing content and developing film. So I think this is probably the right time and space to get into that. And it's really, really exciting. Whatever you're looking at on YouTube, on Netflix, you can see not just what we used to grow up with, which was Americana and Hollywood and all that. Now everything is skewing towards our neck of the world. And I think it's an exciting opportunity to get involved in that space.
So we'll deep dive into that a little bit later. I want to go down memory lane.
Go
on. So we've known each other, I think, since 15, 16 years old.
Thereabouts.
Thereabouts.
Yep.
Very good soccer player, if I recall. We played in the same team.
Yes.
For many years.
Yeah.
Overseas. How the world brings us together, right?
That's right.
Now we're back in beautiful Malaysia. But you came to prominence at a pretty young age by developing a show that many will remember called The Effing Show.
Yep.
And again, it was a sort of a comedic type of show online.
Yeah.
And perhaps many could say years before its time, where you could argue podcasts like this or shows that were going online. How did that come about?
Yeah.
Why was it so popular, and what inspired you to sort of get there?
So I think we were developing sort of this satirical online series that delved into Malaysian social political satire. And so me and my gang of buddies around 2010 developed a weekly show where I would say things into a camera and we would have small little skits, and it sort of gained popularity. And this is the time when it's just sort of pre-YouTube, and YouTube is just about to kick in into the space. And we were shooting in 720p with the cameras, and everything was just so much more difficult to do. But we would do it over, on a weekly period, and I think over a course of 100 episodes across a number of years, it developed a little bit of a cult following, at least in Malaysia, and it gave us the opportunity to do a lot of cool business brand things as well. And it was great because every week we would make fun of a particular topic that was in the zeitgeist, and it sort of hit a nerve, and we did it for as long as we could. And sometimes it got you into a little bit of trouble. Sometimes it gave you 50,000 views in one day. And so just managing that delicate line was quite the challenge, but it was a really, really good experience in understanding what was the precursor of the creator economy of what we see now. Now everybody is making content, having either skits, recipe videos, beauty tutorials, all of that. And I think we were just doing it somewhere around that 2010 to 2012 period where it was not as common, because I think the technology just wasn't there quite yet in terms of people receiving it and producing it. And but it gave us an opportunity and insight into what the landscape was going to be like when it came to creating content, distributing it, and how do you sort of harness the attention to it and creating other things from that.
So maybe take us back to that. I mean, you touched on a really good point. It came from a position of passion, right? Where you guys wanted to just talk about what was fun and interesting. You mentioned you were doing it with mates. And today, you could argue that, online content is fairly cluttered. What was different back then? What's different now? And even back then, were you thinking about monetization? Were you thinking about brands getting involved, or was it just for views and earning revenue streams in other ways?
Yeah, I think at the time it was just trying to create content on a weekly basis. And I think we understood that scheduling your content in a manner in which people can predict, it's kind of like it was television but for online. You still needed to do it on some sort of scheduled basis so that people could know what to expect. Because if you did a show that would just appear, once every 2 weeks or any sort of random schedule, it didn't really garner the attention. But once you could do it in an effective, sustainable way, you could start seeing the results. You start seeing that, this particular episode really blew up, and you would analyze what were the reasons for that. And then you try to replicate it, and then you do it a little bit more. And I think the differences between now and then is I think the market or the marketplace of viewers is just so much more accepting of any type of content now. It didn't need to be just culture and lifestyle. You can do pretty much anything now to support whatever.
But one could argue you were a first mover, right? I mean, there weren't
Sure.
any sort of players in the marketplace. So you can sort of take over and dominate and then and make of it what you will.
What happened at the time was when we were getting that traction, we started getting conversations with FMCG brands, with tech brands saying, hey, we like the personality of you, we like the personality of your show. What can we do to sort of promote or cross promote in terms of the respective brands? And I think that's when it got really interesting that you could create something and it didn't need to go through gatekeepers of this guy is relevant and this guy. We had the numbers or the views to show that we had the attention of a particular type of audience, and that began to grow and grow, and we managed to build different companies and different types of content streams. At the time, Vice was doing a lot of interesting content. I mean, this dates me a little bit, but around 10, 12 years ago, that's where everything was. And we would sort of create multiple shows outside of that effing show. And we began to see that maybe this might be a way of creating a sustainable business. And I think the only thing I would probably do differently now is sometimes you can be slightly ahead of the curve because the brands themselves and the audiences themselves might be, it just might be a little bit ahead of their time. And I think now everyone is just hungry. Brands and creators are just hungry to create and collaborate in all of these different ways. And I think you can see the results because people are buying products now from the attention that has been garnered from all of these sort of content that's been out there.
At what point, I suppose, does it go from sort of play, enjoyment, passion, to you sort of saying with your good mates at a young age, no, we need to monetize this? And you know, you mentioned you've done it before, you've seen the transition in terms of the marketplace, in terms of how that's increased. Would you want to make a comeback?
Probably not. And the reason for that is being a creator, to create content and to sort of have that consistency takes an awful amount of work. I'm sure you and your team know that you have to record these podcasts at a particular schedule, and you want to keep that momentum going. And I think having been a radio presenter and producer for 9 years and being online for X amount of years doing television documentaries, at some point in time, you give a lot of yourself away into the space,
right.
And sometimes you can't reel it back in. And as a result, I think you have to sort of decide for yourself how much more of yourself do you want to give away to receive that attention, and at what cost is that? And of course, there are going to be monetary considerations for that, for sure. And I think then you start making decisions about.
But if it becomes a way of living,
yeah.
Like let's take a Joe Rogan for example.
Sure.
I mean, he'll do a podcast that'll go a lot longer than this one, probably 3 hours at a time, right?
Yeah.
And we all sort of listen religiously to him. Is he what's he giving away? And what I mean.
And he's at the sweet spot of where all creators want to be, which is it's not work anymore. You do it because it's your passion, and it just by default becomes the thing that people want to sort of pay attention to you. So if you ask Joe Rogan when he does his podcast, when he does his MMA fights, when he does his comedy, I don't think he considers it work at that juncture. He's already had all of this success because he's done the legwork for 5, 8, 10 years where nobody was paying attention. And now that you've done that groundwork and now people are paying attention to you, that's sort of the sweet spot where he doesn't have to really kowtow to any particular, you know, brand or conglomerate to influence what he says or what he does not want to say. And I think that's an amazing hill to climb, but to climb that hill requires quite a bit of perseverance as well.
Well, I would argue that Spotify took a big gamble on
Huge,
Joe, right?
yeah.
I mean, it was quite heavily documented that he made a lot of money for his series and all that type of stuff. Is there something to take from that in the sense that if there's a natural way of where people are drawing audiences online, let them go and don't sort of oversell or make it too commercialized.
Yeah.
And maybe there's kind of a sweet spot. Where do brands need to sort of understand that point?
I think the first word that comes to mind is, I think, authenticity. With somebody like Joe Rogan, like it's all about the authenticity of who he is. He doesn't pretend to be the smartest guy on the planet, but he tries to engage with people who are way smarter than him. So you get really interesting guests, and you can tell that, you know, for all of Joe Rogan's flaws, he is authentic in the type of person that he presents himself to be. And
yes.
And I think authenticity is really this very difficult sweet spot for people to land on over a short period of time, over a longer period of time as well. Because there's a question now about, is everybody going to end up being a 50-year-old YouTuber, right? Like, is that the goal of everybody's life right now, right? Because you can start at 17 and you can continue this for as long as you want. And I think if you garner as much attention as that, then the world is your oyster. You can start selling products, you can start selling t-shirts, you can start selling merch, you can start doing anything that you want that actually sort of makes financial sense for the business.
Which is a good segue, because then the next question becomes more about platform. So again, using Joe Rogan, no, it's...
He hasn't paid us. He hasn't paid us for this at all.
No, he hasn't. No. And we're reaching out to you, Joe. If you're watching this, please contact us. But it was not a brand per se. I mean, obviously Spotify is a brand.
Yeah.
But it was the platform, right, that gave him the leverage and the pathway to be able to do it. So it's not kind of like a particular MNC or anything like that that's going out saying you need to have a mug that has your logo on it or anything like that.
Yeah.
Right? Subtle plug. But what do we make of the platforms now directing traffic and running the show, whether it be YouTube or Spotify for that matter,
sure.
When it comes to sort of online content? Are they the king and queen masters, do you think, moving forward?
I don't know. And I think, you know, looking at the example of not of the Joe Rogans of the world, but even of local content creators, I think most content creators are platform agnostic in a sense that, I use this analogy where if you're creating content, using apple as your main ingredient, you want to make apple pie, you want to make apple sauce, you want to make apple juice, but it only comes from the
You want to have an Apple phone?
you may want to do that, right? So as a result, I think you want to utilize all of these different platforms to the best of your abilities from the main thing that you're doing. And I think each platform now, whether you're on TikTok or whether you're on Twitch streaming video games, or whether you're on Kick or whether you're on YouTube, I think there are all different pros and cons of using these platforms, but at the end of the day, I think it's the interest and authenticity that you can garner from who you are and what you do and what your content is. So I still am of the side that the content is still king, and you park yourself accordingly where it suits you the best. And depending on the age group that you're targeting, it might be Facebook for a certain generation, TikTok for the younger kids. I think there's no barrier for entry for any of those now. And I think that's where the magic is. It's complete power to the creator, and that creator can decide how much or how little he wants to do.
And that's interesting because I again subscribe, excuse the pun, to the same school of thought in the sense that content is king, irrespective of platform or anything like that, right? But I wanted to switch gears a little bit. You spent a lot of time in radio.
Yeah.
I am personally of the impression that it's an underutilized medium, and I know everything's about demographics and data points for brands and all that.
Yeah.
I mean, where do you sit, just working at the back end of one of the top radio stations in the country for a long time, and knowing it, I mean, where do you see radio as a marketing tool for brands and companies today?
I think radio now is as relevant as it could be, only because if you look at what YouTube is right now, and I use YouTube as an example because I consume a lot of YouTube, and YouTube right now is essentially just talking heads. So if you switch off sort of the screen of your YouTube and into whatever channel that you're playing, it's just two people talking, which is essentially 2 or 3 people talking, which is essentially what radio is.
Which is essentially what we're doing.
Yeah,
right.
And people can switch off if they don't like the visuals of what they see.
Don't hit mute.
But the content still keeps on going. And so you see radio stations like TalkSport in the UK.
Yeah, brilliant.
They do what they're currently doing. They put a camera in front of it, and suddenly it increases the views and the attention, or at least the reach of who otherwise people might not be listening to you. So in Malaysia, it's happening right now. Podcasts is, as we're being on this particular podcast right now, you're seeing a boom in interest because there's so much diversity and interest. You could find a tangential interest now to anything that you wish to talk about, and you would most likely find an audience. It isn't what it used to be where you need to talk about X, Y, and Z to garner the attention. All you need to do is change that thumbnail, create a compelling title, create a good description with all the relevant links, and suddenly you garner the attention that you desire. And there's just, I think, no limits. I think that's the exciting part about not just radio content, but just content as a whole, where you can sort of be the puppet master of how you want to be perceived.
Really good point, right? Because again, most media platforms have changed the game. I mean, whether it's print, whether it's, I'm talking, I guess most people would say traditional forms of media, right? Which radio has been around for a long, long time. I mean, we go back to Australian days and people used to listen to cricket on the wireless and all that sort of stuff. But it's pegging it or tagging it with social media, podcasts like this and sort of different things. Today they're having politicians, we won't name who, that are becoming DJs and sort of doing their own thing. So, I mean, do you think that from what you've seen, radio has transformed itself into a powerful enough weapon that can combat or it still be, effable in terms of the eyes of brands and companies?
For sure. I think radio as sort of a traditional format has redefined itself in more recent ways. So in most studios when I was working in, it was just 3 people in a room, microphones and no cameras. But now radio DJs kind of need to put a nice shirt on, and because the cameras are there. And because the cameras are there, still are performing in that studio, but now you have a visual audience that will maybe garner a bit of attention. So we're living in an era where clipping a moment is going to be the thing that propels a particular product or particular content, right? So we might have a conversation, we might have a big hearty laugh after you saying something controversial. One of your team's going to clip it, and that's going to go out there, and that might just generate the interest of an audience that you might not necessarily reach, but suddenly there's a connection or something meaningful there where people are going to sort of potentially give you the chance of getting back on that show next week as well and say, let's see what Pete has to say the week after.
Well, I mean, the next question would naturally be, are we living in a clickbait universe where whatever it might be, you talk about talk sport, you talk about anything, is that the way we're sort of intrigued, enticed and solicited into potentially watching or seeing or listening a particular thing?
Yeah, I mean, the clickbait thing, unfortunately or fortunately, it works, right? So I'm seeing a lot of Malaysian brands that they might be sort of, F&B brands, and they'll have these live streaming segments with the most controversial person that's been on the news or whatever, and they immediately sell their product in between the conversation, and you can see how many products that they will have sold at the end of that conversation. It's a wild marketplace right now that these results are so tangible now that it actually works. And so the question then becomes, is that what you want your brand to be known for, or is there something deeper? Is there a second layer to that, a third layer where you can sort of stretch the attentiveness of your audience, and can you build that trust? I mean, going into your role, building trust with your audience is going to be the bedrock of what you want to do.
Sure.
And some people don't need to necessarily build that trust. Some people like the shock and awe of what that show is, and they're ready to click right away. So everybody wants a notification reminder, everybody wants a like, subscribe, and it's completely natural because we keep reminding everyone. I mean, everywhere you go now, people are looking at their phones, and I think if that's the world we're living in, I think then there's maybe an opportunity to make the most of it. It's a little bit of a pessimistic way of looking at the world, but that's kind of where we are right now.
Fair play. So behind the scenes, carte blanche.
Yeah,
I mean, you've seen, we're still focusing on radio.
Yep.
Is there a brand or a campaign on radio that kind of sticks out to you that came into BFM? I think most will know that's where you were kind of attached to. And you just went, holy shit, that was magical. These guys put a lot of effort into it. It had traction, it got the results. Was there something that really stood out from a brand perspective for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, in thinking about what you've just said, in more recent years, campaigns haven't just been sort of one media focus. It usually has tentacles to something that you're doing on air,
Fair. Yeah.
something that you're doing with a visual component, and something that you're doing that has an activation aspect as well. And with most partners that you're working with, whether they're the big conglomerates or any other type of campaign, it needs to have that activation, and sometimes that activation falls short, but sometimes it really does all the legwork that all of that brand communication manages to pull through. So it's nothing comes to mind right off the top of my head, but we did some great campaigns where we won awards for and stuff like that, but you really had to sort of analyze it as to whether was it really a good radio bit? Was it just a combination of where the zeitgeist is? I think we did, there was one campaign that on Netflix they had Street Food Asia series, and notably Malaysia was absent in all of the episodes. So a company, a sort of branding company, came to us and said, "Hey, can we produce a full Street Food Asia episode that Netflix didn't include, and it would be a Malaysia episode, and we would promote it on air, we would promote it on YouTube," and it became a really big campaign that sort of garnered a lot of the attention because Malaysians were upset that Malaysia wasn't included in the episode. So sometimes you're looking at what the zeitgeist is and what people are either conflicted or upset about or excited about, and they can lend themselves into your campaign. It's a little bit of advocacy, right? So you're almost trying to advocate for something, and if you can hit that sweet spot, suddenly everybody's on your side.
No, fair. Hi guys, a brief interlude during this fiery chat, just to bring your attention to an incredibly worthwhile cause in Hospices Malaysia, an institution that we work very closely with here at Go. You can find the contact information probably here below and the website, just to bring attention and awareness to a terrific organisation and to see if you can help in any way you can. So thanks for listening. Key question is, we're transitional era.
Gosh.
I'm not sure whether are we Gen X, Y, Z? We're running out of alphabets.
Yep.
Particularly for you and I. But is the jingle dead?
No. The jingle's still alive.
The jingle's alive?
Jingle's alive.
When was the last time we saw a modern brand come up with a jingle on radio?
Yeah, it's hard, but I see, I hear Chicken Rice Shop and they've got a jingle.
Has there been a jingle that's been conceived in the last sort of 2-3 years?
I think it's going to be a jingle. It's going to be a full campaign that goes beyond it. And most people think that when they spend their money on radio ads, that's going to be it. I think that's maybe where the shortcoming is. I think it's trying to figure out what's going to work for audio, what's going to work for video, and then it's attaching yourself to all of these different. You can't deny the power of influencers and KOLs right now. And how do you merge those worlds in a natural, authentic way where you're not trying to push it too hard? And I think that's where a lot of brands try to cut to the chase, where let's get that important KOL and attach ourselves without having any storytelling to it. Storytelling, as you know, is still such an important thing. And I think people coming up with what that storytelling arc is from a campaign, from an activation perspective, that's where you're going to see the most results. And I think that's where you spend probably most of your time trying to think about how to connect these brands through these stories as well, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
You talked about content king, storytelling being the embryonic force, I think, behind most marketing campaigns.
But storytelling is not as sexy when you're trying to say. But particularly when you speak to brands,
right?
When you put them into it, they can kind of see themselves into it, and if they can see themselves in the story, it's great. Sometimes you've had these meetings with a lot of account executives where, like, oh well, it should be like this, it should be like that. I think it's having not just the perception of what your brand is, it's trying to have perspective about who you are. It's a little bit of empathy, of trying to put yourself into the shoes of the consumer as well, and how do they see your brand, and sort of really leaning in on it and leveraging on it as well.
Couldn't agree more.
Having a bit of fun along the process.
Yeah, and you could sort of go into data research, you could go into process of how you get there from a storytelling perspective, meaning bringing the client. The best campaigns we've been involved in is where the client is in a room with us brainstorming. Yeah. As opposed to being sort of being told. This is our problem, this is the solution. And there's nothing wrong with that, and it can work as well. But I think more often than not, we've seen the best efficacy and results where you're doing it together and they subscribe and sort of buy into it.
But I think brands now are braver now. Brands, relatively speaking.
In what context? I would still say there's a level of conservatism.
For sure.
Just across the Asian board.
But even just the idea of you saying that they're willing to be in the room with you brainstorming, that's the brands and folks who figure that out quicker, that the quicker they are to be part of the story, it's much better than sort of being told this is what's going to be best for you.
Well, I'll tell you what lets me down is when you're in a meeting, and
Go on.
is where you come up with potentially a great idea. Look, and ideas can be struck down, and anyone can come up with it. Is when you're met with a barrier of, has anyone done it before?
Yeah.
Which is as trite as that sounds.
Yeah.
It comes up more often than not.
Yeah.
And then the whole point of it is, well, don't you want to be original? Don't you want to be a first mover?
Yeah.
But come back to that conservatism where it's met with, well, Jesus, if someone hasn't done it,
you're right.
And I guess it's the element of, in total understanding, 20 years of doing it, marketing directors they don't want to stick their necks necessarily
on the line,
on the chopping board, right? So it's kind of like, well, let's park that. And let's go with the hotel ballroom press conference.
Yep.
And you're kind of like...
And the worst thing about it is that originality now is even harder, because you can see the metrics of what's been successful with each particular campaign that your competitors and your tangential sponsors have done, and you can sort of analyze, well, we'll take about 20% of that, 50% of that, we can reduce the risk of that, and let's just do that. So originality is getting harder and harder with AI being in the mix. You can just ask AI to figure out, give me the closest iteration of this particular campaign that had these elements. So originality now is getting harder and harder. I mean,
but the question is, mate, is it appreciated to begin with? So it might be getting harder and harder to do.
Yeah.
At the end goal is clients or people or brands or companies, even entrepreneurs, there's got to be an appreciation and appetite to want to take it in.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like, I'm of the view right now that two things have kind of dropped, right? So originality has kind of dropped because somebody else can take the risk and you can just kind of follow suit behind it and manage that risk. And the quality of things have dropped as well because right now anybody can make a show. You don't need like a big camera. You don't need like you don't need to have these exorbitant production costs to create something that's truly tangible for people to be sort of attached to. And then the question becomes, you know, what is it that I want to create that creates that brand value that best represents me?
And let me throw something else in the mix. Just a simple word called speed.
Yeah.
I think back in the day, not too long ago, mind you, I think a client or even internally would give you a little bit with digital and time to come up and be thoughtful, be imaginative, be creative. Is it no longer in existence? So when you talk about that lack of originality and stuff like that, do you think that that plays a role? Just in terms of, you know, where people can go away and sometimes, I mean, I remember creative directors when dad and mum and, you know, back in the day, they would have a couple of weeks to go out and sit in a park, have a couple of beers, do whatever it was that got them to that magical place.
And now,
but what they came back with was just, you know, pure masterpieces. Now it's kind of like, hey, listen, if you don't get back to me on Monday, you lose out.
And I'll go to someone else.
I'll go somewhere else, or I'll hire someone else. How much, people don't talk about that a lot. How much do you reckon the process and speed plays a role, do you think?
It's huge because right now, when I think about sort of speed and originality, I'm always looking at sort of the next generation down because they're the ones who are making all of this. I mean, as you get older, your conservatism increases and the ability to be brave and bold, like, you know, reduces quite a bit. So I'm always looking at, you know, all of these short form bits of content online and like, wow, they're willing to do that for that video. They're willing to do all sorts of different things. You know, I think about Mr. Beast, you know, folks who out there who consume Mr. Beast videos, he's changed how people watch the first 30 seconds of the first 60 minutes of a video. They call it the Mr. Beastification of YouTube because he managed to condense what's happening in the next 15 minutes into the tightest 60 seconds. And every video needs to do that. And because he's got the track record of views to show that. And so if you are not up to scratch on what are some of these more effective tactical strategies and techniques, you're losing out because the younger kids are showing that, hey, this is working and it's going to work for a foreseeable time until somebody else comes up with the next more interesting thing. No,
fair play. All right, Ez. Listen, I'm going to move into a more indelicate arena.
Go on.
And hit you with a couple of spicy questions, if I may. And this is going back a little ways. Some may remember, some might not. You ran a very established publishing house.
Right.
Once upon a time. And again, I think
print publishing.
when print was king. And print.
I'm sounding old. Who publishes books now? But,
that's all right.
Yeah.
And then found yourself in a little bit of a controversy.
Yes.
We're not going to sort of dive into that.
Excellent.
Which is pretty good because my lawyers are away in Bali this weekend. So, but I guess why I wanted to sort of bring that up with you is because from a marketing perspective, which is what the podcast is all about, did you find yourself sort of diving into arguably the biggest crisis management situation of your entire life? And you know, for everyone out there, and I remember being with you and we caught up
Sure.
frequently, but how did you manage it?
Well, I guess maybe for context for folks who may not know.
Please.
So
Wanted to leave that to you, but on how much you wanted to divulge.
yes, so I was a book publisher, and we were doing non-fiction books. We were doing translation of non-fiction books from English to Malay, and we did a whole different bunch of different titles. And one of our books was seized, and it got banned, and I was subsequently arrested for the contents of that book. So what happened was 8.5 years later of fighting the case, I succeeded. And the interesting about crisis management in that particular scenario, it's not about managing the expectations of what the public sees necessarily. In the stakes of that particular scenario that I found myself in, is that if you don't manage it properly from a legal perspective or from a PR perspective, you might end up going behind bars for a X period amount of time. So at the time, it wasn't really so much about managing the PR of my situation. It was.
But did it play a role? Because
It played a role. It played a
you were
role.
saying that if you didn't do it, then potentially the narrative could have changed, or the decision might have changed.
For sure. It also helps that the subject matter was of interest enough in the public about my case that it was always kept in the public eye. So there would always be attention towards my cases. Journalists would show up, and people from embassies from different countries would show up to court to lend their support in all sorts of different ways. But at the same time, being the subject matter of the case, I couldn't say so much in public because the case was underway. And so you had to just make sure that the case was still in the public eye to sort of garner some sort of support and sympathy, because not everybody's going to be interested in what you're up to year 3, year 5, year 7. So to find myself in a situation where the courts decided that it would go in my favor, compensation was being made, and this is what I meant earlier about being out there. There's a cost to it, and whatever you put out there sometimes has, at least in Malaysia, the opportunity to bite yourself. And if it bites yourself in the back, then you need to take a little bit of accountability and figure out what's the best way to navigate yourself out of the situation. I was fortunate enough to have good support from family and good lawyers and good friends, where it turned out that I wouldn't have to spend any time behind bars, and I'm back to doing things that I like, which is making content and entertaining folks. Yeah.
And can I just say, I would have come and
thank you.
Seen you through the glass window and had a chat with you, but always on your side, buddy. But let me ask just one more question on that. I know it's slightly contentious, but did you have a team? How much was it down to you in terms of deciding how you were going to manage that risk? And I'm not, again, trying to make a big deal out of the particular situation. I guess I'm looking at it where people have their own crises. Where did you develop a team? Did you say that you know what, we're going to sort of figure it out internally? What was the deployment? No doubt, life changing.
Yeah.
How did you decide how you were going to play it, and what was kind of the very basic formula moving forward?
Yeah, it's tough because when it comes to this whole endeavor of going to court and dealing with the legality of how your case is going to be turned out, it's a slightly different thing about how the public perceives what is actually going on. So every now and then, if you post an update on what's happening with your case, you might get 300 likes or whatever, but people are just essentially giving you support. At the end of the day, you're kind of left to your own devices to figure out what is the next best step. I was always guided by my legal team as to what I was able to articulate, what I was not able to articulate. And from there, you wanted to make sure that the narrative of what you're going through is authentic to the situation that I was actually in, what I was trying to defend myself against, and trying to sort of articulate that some of these claims that were charged against me were unconstitutional and all of these different things. So it's a hard one to articulate because at some point across 8.5 years, you kind of give up about like what you think you can succeed in, what you can't. So sometimes it takes a little bit of luck. Sometimes it's powers that go way beyond me, and so it worked out in the end. But I can't tell you that. I mean, most of it came down to speaking to family and friends about what are the next best steps. And I think being familiar enough about how the media relates to stories, there was always, I guess, an attention curve that I needed to manage, because over a longer period of time, people don't have the attention span to actually sort of pay attention. So you needed to sort of like figure out what are those milestones and what are the opportune moments to share with people what's actually happening.
No, fair play, brother. And the right decision, certainly in my eyes.
Hopefully,
so
yeah.
Nicely done.
Yeah.
All right, mate, we'll pivot to sweeter things.
Okay.
You talked about content production.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, you're developing films, that's the idea.
That's right.
You're moving forward. Is there anything that you want to sort of, I want to sort of get to, how do you kind of promote from a marketing perspective when the market is so, we talked about Netflix and, iFlix and Amazons and all that sort of stuff. How do you sort of get that going in a very sort of cluttered marketplace? Are they partners at the end of the day that you can sort of go with? Because a lot of people probably don't understand how the game works.
Yep.
For example, you educated me just the other day that Netflix has a grant, right? If you've got something locally and you want to pitch it to them, they'll come to the party with a cert and kind of match it. Never knew it.
Yeah,
I'm not sure how well publicized that is.
No, I mean, I think so. Netflix and Amazon and all of these streamers, they have a commissioning budget
For sure.
to decide whether something that you're creating is aligned with what their interests are. So you can pitch it to them, and they can say, "Hey, we can, come in with financing at X amount of percent," and you can sort of proceed to get the financing from other investors as well. It's still early days. Me and my two other partners, Zahir Omar and Jun Tan, we've co-founded a production house called Wild East Studios, and so we're trying to develop films that are going to be enjoyable, a little bit of action, a little bit of comedy.
At the end of the day, you need, which is all well and good, right?
Yeah.
But you still need that elevation.
Sure.
In terms of audience.
And so I think, at least in filmmaking, as we're sort of looking into it right now, it starts with the fundamentals. It starts with the fundamentals of having a script that is actually worthy of being invested upon. And then you can go on to all of these next levels. You realize about small things about casting, for example. So can the casting of that particular action star mixed with maybe a YouTube creator playing a sub role, mixed with a female action star, for example. When you combine all of these things, that actually comes into the consideration of when you're developing the entirety of what this involves. It doesn't, unfortunately, it's not enough that person A is just a great actor.
But isn't it super interesting? Because we were talking before, like even boxing is mixing and reinventing itself.
Absolutely.
In terms of having an MMA fighter get a guy out of retirement in Mike Tyson at 55.
That's right.
But they're getting the views, right?
Yeah.
If you were just going heavyweight for heavyweight,
yes.
Do you get the audience and all that sort of stuff? Are you saying you're going to sort of bring that theorem to film?
Yeah, so you kind of have to, because and it's not to say that we're going to hire person A because they have 50 million followers across Indonesia, which, albeit, it does get it helps and gets your head scratched, right? But it makes a difference because the attention that they've garnered, mixed with a good story, mixed with the right director of cinematography, mixed with the right director and the producer and the funding, all of these things equate to something sort of far greater than yourself. Now, once the film is made, then there's that added layer of, okay, what's the marketing campaign going to be? Is this film part of a zeitgeist of zombie films that are currently in trend? When you're developing a film, because the production timeline takes anywhere between 12 months to 24 months, you're kind of thinking, is the subject matter of the film or is the cast that we're looking at going to be relevant in about 24 months? So there's a lot of risk assessment to figure out as to whether that's actually going to hold water by the time it gets released. So you're looking at all sorts of considerations. You're looking at, can this attract money at the box office? There's also then the opportunity to distribute the film onto streamers like Amazon, Netflix, Disney, and all of that. So, and is there an appetite for these types of content, not just within the region of Southeast Asia, which is where, the heart of where our production is, but you want to make sure that it can travel to other markets, China, Korea, Hollywood, and that's the real challenge, because right now we're seeing that in so many types of content that we're seeing, TV series, films, and so that's where the juggling act is becoming, and we're learning in real time, because we've got interested investors and partners who are part of a larger outfit from Singapore that have tentacles to Hollywood, and they tell you that, hey, these are the beats that we need to see in the film that will guarantee a particular type of success. So there's so many moving parts. A script gets written up to draft 13 to
So where are you at the moment? I mean
so right
in
now,
terms of,
so right now for one of the films we're developing,
can we get a little bit of
a little bit,
a little touch or
so I mean,
flavor?
So people might be familiar with like a spaghetti western from back in the day. So
Sure.
we're developing a satay western.
A satay
A
western.
satay western. So it's sort of a regional take on those spaghetti westerns of the past, but we're going to be setting it in sort of this Nusantara, Malaysia, Indonesia space. There's a lot of action. There's a lot of great cast members, and you want to be able to sort of replicate not just good stories, but good stories that can travel, even though they're going to be held in a language that might be foreign to other viewers around the world. The result of people just reading subtitles now gives the opportunity for films to travel in ways that you can't imagine now. So we're going to try do that, and we're going to see where it takes us.
Satay western.
Satay western, yeah.
That's something else. Wow.
Yeah.
Looking
So
forward to that.
yeah,
then.
it's gonna be tentatively. It's called River Runs Red, and so we have secured financing for the film up to about 70%. We're still looking for financing as well, but it's at the stage now where we're going to be involved in pre-production by the end of the year, start production middle of next year. So it's a very exciting but slow process as well, because so much is at stake, and so we want to make sure that all of the you want to cross your dots and I's as best as you can.
Very nice. Okay, mate. Only a couple to go.
You're doing good.
Thanks, pal.
Yeah,
Trying my best here.
I used to be on the other side of this.
And I've learned from you. I watched many tutorials to get up to scratch. As you come from, obviously, a very political background. I know your dad, I know mum, I know you went to school with your brother as well.
Yeah.
And obviously know your sister as well.
Yes.
Well, you could say the
Know
entire
the whole family? Yeah.
Dad's obviously been in the public eye. Amazing job, building from scratch his law firm. Unbelievable. And then obviously, went into sort of politics.
Sure.
And whether or not still today. A lot of time for your dad in terms of him as a human being, for sure. My question to you is, you for sure would have not been involved in much what was going on. I remember, if I could bring up, being invited to the inauguration of Kita once upon a time.
Yeah.
Do you ever, can you see yourself with what you've learnt through your dad, through your experiences, all this wealth of knowledge in many ways, going into Malaysian politics?
I've thought about this question, but the answer is quite easily no.
Okay.
And the reason for that is politics is like the apex of being a content creator because you need to have sort of thick skin, you need to have opinions, you're ready to get shot at, backstabbed by sort of the entire ecosystem of where you belong in. So much props to all of these Malaysian politicians who have something to say every 2 days or 3 days. But it's a really hard job, which is how do you balance representing the interests of the people whilst in a realpolitik way managing the survival of your political relevancy in these institutions, political parties. And so, everybody who's watching has an interest in Malaysian politics because I think most Malaysians care a lot about the state of the country.
There's a great sense of patriotism.
There's patriotism and interest in just politics as itself. You can see from the advent of, we're on podcast, but political content podcast is one of sort of the higher streaming things that are happening online in Malaysia right now.
But is it because of the high intensity sort of standpoint where the intrusion levels? Is it the potentially the dark nature of it? Because with your background, your knowledge, your experience, and all that sort of stuff, and I know you want to do good things. Why? The very definite no to want to sort of take that on?
I think different people have different ways of contributing to the greater good, and I think people have people who are in this political game are built differently. I think folks like myself and yourself, we try to draw the margins as to how much we want to expose ourselves, because I think once you're involved in the public world of politics, you're involved in a real game that really puts at stake your livelihood, your safety. The public scrutiny is quite sufficient. I wouldn't say with all of the experience I've had being in the public eye that I don't know what that scrutiny is like, but I think different people have different thresholds of what that scrutiny that they're willing to handle. And I think when you realize that you can only handle that much, you kind of have to take a step back and say, well, maybe not for me. And some people now thrive on it. Some people really crave and love the attention. And for a period of time, I'm sure I really enjoyed it as well, but it comes at a cost. I've always said this, you have at the checkout counter, there's always going to be a cost, and you're going to find out real quick about what that cost is. And when you decide, some things you have to sort of draw where those lines are. And usually it's after a conversation with my mom about whether I should do this or should not do that. That usually decides the matter pretty quickly. So.
Oh, buddy, supremely mature answer for me. Favorite football team?
Well, you and I support the same team, don't we?
We should.
Manchester United?
There you go.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Not having the best time.
No.
Even worse PR. So
Malaysian Airlines recently signed.
That's right.
What's your take on that?
I think they're investing in something into the future, obviously, and I think that's always a good thing. They're
Future of Malaysian Airlines or Manchester United?
Oh, maybe for both.
Okay.
I'm not sure who's the winning side on that, right?
Right.
So, but I think that's an example where legacy brands are also trying to redefine themselves, right? So these kind of big brands.
But I'll tell you what would excite me, right?
Go on.
Is because Malaysia is no stranger to the EPL.
Yes.
You and I love football.
Yeah.
We're passionate about it and all that. Marmy, all these guys have gone out and sort of said, well, what is the real differentiator in terms of how you're going to engage with these brands? So I would imagine that typically, and again, not privy to any knowledge, that they will have a certain criteria of pay X and we'll give you X or
Right.
give you Y.
Yeah.
If Malaysia Airlines is going in,
Yeah.
rather than, yes, okay, we get Wes Brown and we get a couple of players, Patrice Evra and all these guys, coming down for a press conference. But have we not done that to death? What's the chili putty that we talked about? Give us something a little bit different.
I think it's. I don't know if
for the money that you pay. Would be my.
But
I'm probably going to get in a bit of trouble on that.
I don't know if you sort of agree with this, but I do feel with these kind of things, especially with sport, like it's almost that success on the field translates to success off the field. And I think there was a period of time, at least for Manchester United, during the Ed Woodward years of being CEO, where he didn't equate the two, that he felt that he could achieve commercial success without necessarily being commensurate to the success on the field. But I think now with what you're seeing in any sport, whether it's Real Madrid or Manchester City, that success on the field is important. And I think once you sort that element out, the success off the field becomes pretty natural. And if you're trying to spin in any other way, it becomes really, really challenging.
Well, I would play devil's advocate.
Go on.
Because you could argue, look at a Wrexham, right?
Yeah.
That have taken
Sure.
the Ryan Reynolds story, how they're going. And then I would also argue that what is this sort of U-turn in terms of United being suffering for years
Yeah.
So Malaysian Airlines might have it right in front of our eyes.
They might be early.
They've hired a new CEO, new
Yep.
technical director.
The timing of it.
The timing of their success might be next year. We don't know, maybe 2 years or whatever the deal is, but
Yeah.
their on-field success it might be a really good time to come in.
It
We don't
sounds
know the
like a
levels of
wild
the deal.
idea that you're betting on Manchester United as almost as an underdog right now, because that's where they could not be. Oh dear, they could not be any lower right now in
Pretty
terms of
much.
football performance. And of course, as a brand, it's still pretty massive. But they need to. I like that we're commenting on what should Manchester United do, but they need to sort that out.
Astro's going to be very upset with us. Yes.
Once that gets sorted out, and with brands like Malaysia coming in early on the cusp of something that could be, you can build an arc
There you go.
that could be profitable and hopefully successful for
Okay,
the team.
mate, last question.
Oh dear.
A Malaysian brand over the years that you just think has done it from a marketing perspective brilliantly well, that you just go, yeah, man, they kill it. One brand.
One brand.
Obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not up to date. There's so many. Look, there's so many different brands doing so many amazing things. So I think you could.
And obviously understanding that it undulates
Sure.
and all that.
I mean, one that comes to mind is as I mentioned, sort of being on Instagram and being on YouTube. I think pre-COVID, this YouTuber Khairul Aming started developing these sort of short videos on how to cook sort of really short recipes. He had sort of a catchphrase in which he used to do these very short videos. And when COVID happened, he started ramping up the production of these videos. And as a result, everybody, because of COVID, everybody was indoors just watching these videos. I think by the time he had developed this amazing attention to his brand, I think he started then creating his own sambal product. And I think, I'm going to get the dates wrong, but I think in 2021, he generated 7.5 million ringgit in sales. In the next year, he doubled it. But I think that all came from him plowing the ground of creating all of this content. And once he got their attention, creating a product that was reflective of his brand. And now I think they've created a couple of factories in Kelantan. He's also Kelantanese, I'm part Kelantanese, so I'm always sort of paying attention to these success stories.
Yep.
And so that is just such an arc from one creator of making content to now being an owner of 2 factories, making millions in selling a particular product. And I always find creators who manage to fulfill that very fascinating because it's really quite authentic to what they are as a person, what their brand values are. Hey, there's also a product that's also going to be moderately priced, and seeing that kind of success happen in 4 short years in sort of the way business is done now, that's really fast. And I find that fascinating to see somebody like that achieve such great heights and still have that sort of brand connection with his followers.
Buddy, I love that answer.
Yeah.
Because a lot would have gone with sort of legacy brands and otherwise. So.
And the legacy brands are doing great stuff themselves. I mean, they've got advisors and consultants advising them on all sorts of different things. But seeing the solo creator do something with their small team, bringing them up, and rewarding their small team to grow with them, I always find those kind of stories pretty fascinating.
Ezra Zaid.
Peter Kreza?
From 15 to we're close to 50.
Oh dear, that was hoping you didn't say
It's been
that.
a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time,
buddy.
mate. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.